quite interested to change your DBS settings and just like you completely change both personality and motor ability.
So this could be something, one way that patients could get more input into the research directions.
And I guess I wanted to just learn more and also try to help others.
They're getting an incredible educational experience because they're getting sort of the neuroscience aspect from me, but they're getting this incredible mentorship from an industry leader, from Mark.
Welcome to Stimulating Brains.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Stimulating Brains. Today I have the pleasure of hosting Mark McAuley, a deep brain stimulation patient and the CEO of Astronomy Australia Limited, and Dr. Susan Boehnke, a researcher and educator at Queen's University in Canada. Together they've been part of a remarkable study that not only focused on the effects of DBS on Parkinson's symptoms, but also engaged undergraduate students in real-time research. At this year's Neurotech conference in New York, I had the opportunity to see Mark and Susan present their work, which involved a highly innovative project using cutting-edge tools like VIA 3D mocap for gait analysis, FNIRS for neuroimaging, and KIN-ARM assessments for motor cognitive function. They explored how adjusting Mark's DBS parameters affected his gait, speech, and sensory motor performance. But the key point to highlight here is that this study was initiated, planned and executed by Mark as both the patient and lead investigator, together with a group of undergraduate students that took the course at Queen's University. Their study is a brilliant example of patient inclusion in research, a theme Dr. Boehnke passionately advocates for, and it provided a transformative learning experience for the students involved. So today we'll dive into Mark's journey living with Parkinson's disease, undergoing DBS, and then the science behind the project and the potential insights into the future of patient-led research in neurotechnology. Thank you so much for tuning in, Stimulating Brains. Great. So, Susan and Mark, thank you so much for joining us here today at Stimulating Brains. And I will have introduced you by now already, so we can jump right into the questions. And as you know, I often start with asking with an icebreaker question about hobbies. So we can maybe start with Mark as CEO of Astronomy Australia Limited. You have a unique insight into the acquisition of large and complex science equipments. What does your company do? And then if you want to also talk about your free time, feel free to do that.
Look, thank you, Andreas. The company, well, I guess the model is that the universities in Australia, they really have to collaborate to be involved in big science projects. So large physics experiments, or indeed astronomy, where you need access to large facilities, billion-dollar telescopes. Well, it's really from maybe some institutions, maybe in the US, can't afford to do that just by themselves, but most institutions around the world, and certainly in Australia, we really need to collaborate. So it's a case of going to the Australian government that tends to fund most of our big science projects and saying we've got 10 universities involved. It's a 10-year project, and we're going to be a partner in a billion-dollar facility. You can sort of make the numbers work. Whereas if it's Melbourne University, they want to buy themselves a billion-dollar telescope. Well, who's going to fund it? So it really gives you a way of those universities collaborating, working together, and then we would also do the representation on international boards and committees and that sort of thing.
So you unionize the universities to buy fancy equipment, like very expensive, big telescopes.
Yeah, it's for my equipment. Cool. Actually, it's not just the fancy equipment though. It's also the just sometimes you get niche equipment that can be complex or difficult to use. I mean, some of the other things we do is fund even computing expertise, for example. So we have national access to teams of software engineers. So if you're an astronomer and you want to optimize your code for simulating some galactic dynamics issue on the latest HPC cluster, but you actually might not be an expert in computing, and you need someone to help parallelize the code, that sort of thing. So it's not just big equipment; it can be niche skills. That's you can build bigger teams if we're all collaborating together. Whereas each researcher's trying to get their own postdoc to do it, it
Yeah,
doesn't quite work as well.
sounds great. And you founded this company. That's really cool. Have been the CEO for a while. And then, hobby-wise, do you want to share anything that you do in your free time?
Oh yeah, look, I am. Well, look, I mean, I do like astronomy. I've always been passionate about astronomy, so I'm actually taking the odd astro image myself of some night object in the night sky is fun. But really, it's just spending time with family. I love
Yeah.
spending time with my wife and my kids, and my kids are getting a bit older now. One's almost 18, the other's 14, so they don't quite want dad around as much. We still have lots of family holidays together, and just getting a bit of time at the weekend to stay with my wife and play a couple of board games, just have a chat. That's probably the main thing I try to do.
Great. And Susan, what about you? What do you do when not leading teaching projects, research projects? What do you do then?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, my husband and I are both neuroscientists, so talking about the brain never really ends in our household, much to the chagrin of our children. But yeah, and with that, along as with what Mark said, most of my spare time is spent with my family, with my husband and my two twin boys, my amazing twin boys, who are turning 18 years old tomorrow.
Wow.
So for many years, we were a sailing family. We had a 46-foot Beneteau down in the Bahamas. And so we spent a lot of our family holidays doing adventure sailing down there. And that was a lot of fun for a while until COVID hit. And then that became quite unruly. So we packed that in. And now we purchased a beautiful cottage just north of Kingston, Ontario, which is a beautiful part of Canada. And so we spent a lot of our time, at least this past summer, on the dock or hiking in the woods behind our place.
Oh, fantastic. So you traded Canada lake house with the Bahamas. I don't know if that's a good idea because you live in Canada already, but it sounds fun. Both sound
It's
amazing.
much more practical.
I'm sure. All right. So this is a very special and unique episode, as you know, and I'm super excited to get to talk to you. We can maybe start a bit with Mark and his DBS journey. So, Mark, could you, and I'm asking this as openly because I know you're open about these things, of course. Could you tell us a bit about your experience living with Parkinson's disease, and then also the decision to undergo DBS surgery? What were maybe key factors that, to make that choice? How difficult was it? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to be open. And I think it's important to share these things. Parkinson's is not a well understood disease in the community, and people often don't talk about these things enough. So, and I do think discussing them helps hopefully people understand it a little bit better and maybe be more accepting. But yes, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's when I was 40. My daughter was 2 months old, and my son was 3 years old.
Wow.
And that was not great timing, I know it was a real shock actually. And my wife's a medical doctor, and I can remember when I was being diagnosed, she could tell what she sort of clicked watching the neurologist ask me to do different tests, and of course she was sitting there quite upset that I didn't know what was going on because I hadn't. She realized what the neurologist actually obviously said what it was, and it was Parkinson's disease. So I can remember going home, having a good cry that night, actually, and getting up the next morning and thinking, okay, so I'm going to make my wife and I'm going to make my two children very proud of how I cope with the situation. And I couldn't really think of anything else better to do. So obviously it's not a nice hand to be dealt, but the best you can do is play that hand as best you can. So I was at the start, and really for subsequent many years, I saw my neurologist. I would see him every few months, 3-4 months. He would assess how I was going, and every now and then tweak my medication, and that was fine. Things kept going fine. So for the first 5-6 years, really the medication kept things very well under control. And then after about 6, 7, 8 years, we started to the medications weren't quite as good. But still, I mean, the medication, if you're getting the right medications, the right doses, the right combination, the right timing, they're very, very, very impressive.
Yep.
But then afterwards, 8 years, you're getting the medication-induced dyskinesias, and that can be quite uncomfortable. And by about 9 years, it was really getting to the stage where I just wasn't getting enough support from the medication. And I was literally getting quite close to thinking I'd have to give up work. I was getting ready to retire because of ill health. And literally, even practical things like going out for dinner with my wife, we couldn't. We still love going out to restaurants. We couldn't do that because if you're on medication and you're not supposed to, eat for an hour before or an hour after, you're taking those medications every 2 hours. That means there's no time to eat. And you do go to a restaurant and say, "Oh, well, can you deliver the mains at 5:10?" You just practically couldn't do it. So we just stopped going out together for meals and this sort of thing. And it might sound trivial, but there was actually just the lifestyle stuff. And you couldn't reliably speak at times. I couldn't get up and give a presentation at work because maybe I'd be a bit off at that time. So it's just really getting to the stage where it really impacted on life. And so in a sense, the choice to have DBS wasn't that difficult because what else was I going to do? And although I was obviously not looking to volunteer for brain surgery. It's not a pleasant thing to have to think about. But when I looked at my life, I thought, no, if I want to, my kids were 10 and 14 by that stage. I'm thinking that I've got to do something. And so having DBS turned out to be not a difficult choice, not a pleasant choice. The one thing is, though, I'd say it was actually all happened at the DBS process at the start of COVID. So I had my DBS May 2020, and of course late Feb March 2020 when COVID hit. So I was all lined up to go, and I had a very good medical team in Melbourne looking after me, very good doctors. And but it was about March, and they said, "Look, I'm sorry, but all elective surgery's been called off." And so we'll have to just try to revisit them some other time. And I was booked in for the 14th of May, I think it was something like that. And so I was a bit disappointed, and obviously, but COVID had hit. And then, but a week before my surgery due date, I got a call from my neurologist. And I was just in a short break at a work meeting, and takes the call, and he says, "Look, we're back home. We can do some patients. Are you interested and available?" I said, "Yes." And this was like, "Okay, we'll do the operation like, I don't know, 6 days time." And so that was all a bit much, and I tried to get one very prepared for it, and I had to quickly. I dialed back into the board meeting I was in, said to the board, "Look, sorry, I'm back on for brain surgery. I'll have to take off. This will be my last day of work." And then I'm, "What?" And because I've been the CEO of the company, sometimes things to organise. So it was all a bit of a rush, and it was hard at that time to go into hospital, not be allowed visitors and stuff like this. So it was quite a I guess quite a stressful experience from that. But that was the right decision, and it wasn't that hard to make in the end.
Can I ask, was it awake or asleep?
Oh, it's awake. Yeah, pretty freaky actually. I must admit, to hear the drill that they're about to take to your skull. You can hear the drill, and of course, there's no actual pain by that point, and because they put in the local anesthetic, but it's still, you're lying there with your head clamped in position, getting a drill taken to your skull. It's all a bit, oh, hang on, but of course there's good reasons why to do it awake, as you know. And I think it's probably more normal now to be able to do the procedure asleep. But this was about 4.5 years ago. It was still mostly done awake, I think. But and the amazing thing is, I can remember when they put the first. It's just the first test electrode in the test wire, and that because you're quite dazed, with all the local anesthetic, they've deliberately got you quite dazed. And next thing, when I felt this, something, I didn't feel it by but just something switched on. And it's when they got the wire down to the STN, really it just kicked in, and I was alert. I went from being so in a dazed state, being completely alert, completely awake. And I'm looking around me. Wow, and I wanted to talk to people because I was lying there and getting a bit bored. I can remember, and they'd agreed to do, they were taking some recordings because it was they also had agreed to be part of a research project. And they needed about 10 minutes to do some recordings. And so I said to this neurosurgeon, lovely guy, and I said, because he wasn't actually doing anything at that point, of course, while they're taking recordings. And so I started chatting away to him. And for some reason, I think it was our kids were both at the same age in high school or something like that. And I was saying, oh yeah, and my son, he said, yeah, he was doing in his maths class that derived the equation for the surface area of a 50-cent coin, like a dodecadon, a 12-sided shape. And so apparently, I don't quite remember this. Apparently, I then derived out verbally the equation for a 12-sided shape, for the surface area of a 12-sided shape, while just sitting there while I was lying there during the operation. And he said to my wife afterwards, they phoned my wife, said, oh yeah, Mark's done well in this surgery, it's all over. And he said, and I've never had anyone like derive the equation for the surface area for
Yeah,
this is not a surprise,
maybe
Mark.
it was
I was just wow.
maybe
And I
it
was
was
so
yeah.
but something switched on. He was like I was well, like obviously I don't really know because this is all my memory of how I was feeling halfway through
Sure.
DBS. But his comments to my wife, I think, sort of give me some sense that what I'm saying is true. But it felt I was, when you get a bit younger, if you're good at math, like as you get older, the mental arithmetic doesn't quite work anymore. When you're like 18, you can still do it really sharply. And I just switched to it felt, I'm not saying it was, but it felt like really sharp in that sort of math, clear thinking logic. But anyway, that's how it felt. So I don't actually have bad memories of the operation, but it is a bit weird to think about.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you are a physicist, but and so I assume you can derive these equations, but maybe they were at a site where that we would use for cognitive enhancement in UES at that moment. No, but I mean, joking aside, very interesting. I mean, I do believe you both know Ben Stecher. I had him on the show as well. He sometimes described the effects of DBS also as liberating, not just in the motor domain, right, where you feel maybe like in a corset, sometimes not being able to move, but sometimes also on a more cognitive domain, liberating. So maybe something in that direction fits that description.
Yeah, look, it does. I mean, I'm not claiming it's long lasting or anything like that, but I just had but I guess, but after the operation, yes, it's not just how it impacts on your movements, which is what people look at and measure and see. It's how it impacts on your mood as well. I'm very conscious that different DBS settings can evoke different emotional reactions, and one needs to, I guess, like any medication. I think about like medication, different DBS doses, like trying a different medication, and one needs to be very, very careful, and one also needs to just watch. One shouldn't self-medicate in that sense. So even though I'm a big advocate for thinking about how patients can get involved in research, you do it in conjunction with your doctor, not opposed to the doctor. I think it's very, very important, very wary. But it does affect how you think about things, how you look at things. It's
Interesting. Yeah, and we get to that in a bit anyways, but maybe as a last one or two questions, now that you have done DBS surgery, first of all, would you do it again? And then second, how do you see yourself now with, electrodes in your head, living with that on a daily basis, and then maybe also your family or friends? Does it play a role at all in your day-to-day, or not really?
Look, they're all good questions. So I guess, well, look, yes, it does play a role, obviously, in many ways. So just now that we've got the programs and the DBS settings configured in a way that works quite well for me, that, obviously from a health point of view, I'm still working, for example, whereas 4 or 5 years ago I was getting ready to quit work. So I think that's from a health point of view. You say, would I do it again? Definitely. I mean, it's definitely, and obviously there's risk with any operation, but the risk is relatively small, I think, with DBS operations. And whereas the return for me has been huge return. Does the role play that? I guess, it's sort of, it can be a bit interesting when you're trying to walk through a security and setting in an airport. Or my son and I, we like going to the Soccer World Cup and going to the last World Cup in guitar and very strict security to go in, and you're explaining, no, you can't go through the metal detector. And I can remember they asked why, and I showed them, well, this DBA, I've got a deep brain stimulator. And they looked at it and they could see the bumps on my head where the electrodes goes in. And you could see that look of slight shock and not quite sure how to react. So I mean that's a simple little example, but I do think it's the fact that I've got Parkinson's and I've gone from 5 years ago ready to quit work to today being able to function very well is it's something I think is important and has changed my focus and what I want to do. So I'm quite happy to spend more time actually advocating for patients, but also not even advocating for patients, just trying to share the story, because I do think it's important to share these medical I guess as a medical success in some ways. Not obviously Parkinson's as people keep progressing, but it gives me a new lease of life, and I do think I'm trying to use that to do something good, because it's you're given not only a second chance, but it really does. Your body deteriorates, and then you get a real burst, and you can keep going for another few years. Well, so it's important to try to do something. So it has changed how I think about things, I guess, and it's also changed with the DBS setting changes. I mean, it's quite interesting that you can change your DBS settings and just like you can completely change both personality and motor ability, and therefore the one does stop. And you've seen this week as well. But you really do think, wow, what does it all mean? But when you look at all the people and judge them based on who they are, and you think, oh, is that just a couple of neurons inside the brain wired slightly differently? It just makes me think about them, what it's like to be what personality means, for example, and how we judge each other. And sometimes, you judge me like this, I'll just tweak my settings, they'll be slightly different or slightly easier to move. Or how people judge is, people, you walk into a pub and you're staggering a bit and your speech is a bit slurred. Oh, you must be drunk. No, well, maybe he's not drunk, maybe he's just got Parkinson's. So again, these so how people from a social point of view react. So yes, I think it definitely changes how I think about things.
Yeah, makes sense.
It was a profound conversation we had when he talked about how in this one setting he didn't know, he was so calm and he felt sort of slightly less emotionally reactive. They're different from, he's an Irishman.
Yeah.
So I mean he can be mercurial, but and you felt that was calm. And you actually question, like, is this me? Is this the real me? Or is this the DBS me on this setting? And it really raises that neuroethical issue of identity and what does it mean to have these implants, to have them become part of who you are?
Absolutely agree. And we had the conversation together with your students recently. You said something similar also, that sometimes under some settings you're a bit more irritable as well, right? So it's not just more calm. Sometimes there are also, let's say, adverse, or probably adverse effects is the right word here, right? But under some settings,
a little manic.
Yep. Oh yeah, there's one set we explored where I was definitely manic, and but then you sort of think, hang on, which is me? Is the slightly irritable actually the real me, and the slightly too calm? So I don't just assume that the one that gives me the best result is actually playing to who I am. But yeah, once a million.
I like all the marks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So far, me too. Absolutely. So thank you so much for being so open about this. I totally agree. More advocacy is fantastic, especially from patients like you, because if I can only imagine if I were a patient, that's the primary source that way I would want to hear it from, not from the doctors, certainly not from the companies, but from fellow patients. So thank you for using your time, a part of your time, to do that. It's really fantastic. But you do so much more, Mark, and I think in comes Susan's role, and maybe we can turn to you a bit, Susan. So we met at Neurotech in New York, and I learned like you both had talks there, I kind of learned this fascinating project that you're on together. And Susan, I think it started with you designing this project, or sorry, you setting up a Neurotech Microcredential course at Queen's University. Can you maybe tell us about that course to begin with, what that is? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to share about it and for having us on the podcast. So the Neurotech Microcredential Program, it really stemmed out of my burgeoning interest in teaching about neurotech. I came to Queen's as a postdoc about 20 years ago doing monkey neurophysiology and eye tracking and a whole lot of neurotech devices. And then I started noticing that they were being used in areas like neuromarketing, and then consumer neurotech started coming out with these EEG devices. And I thought, wow, this is like really intersecting with society in ways I never imagined it would when I was a trainee. And so I started teaching about things like that in courses I was teaching, upper level neuroscience courses. And because I thought it was fascinating, and I think students thought it was as well. And it really started making me think about transdisciplinary teaching. The fact that to understand something like, let's take the example of neuromarketing, you got to understand the business side of things. So I partnered to teach that lecture with a guy from the business school who was a marketing professor, and started to bring together he would bring some business students over to the lecture, for instance, and they would be interacting with neuroscience students. So I'd started thinking about these things about 15 years ago, and with the increasing advent of BCIs and DBS and everything, it just seemed, I thought that students really, there was lots of learners that were interested, but they all had gaps in their knowledge. So you might have engineering students, which obviously we know are very important in the field of neurotech. Elon Musk has famously said he'll only hire engineers, and neuroscientists he probably doesn't need. But the engineers lack the neuroscience knowledge, and that the realistic biological basis of the brain, that it isn't like a perfect system that always operates exactly the same in different individuals. And there was life science students or health science students or like pre-med type students who had were woefully unprepared with the technical skills, but they might have been really interested in neuroscience in the brain. And of course, you had then business students who were interested in the entrepreneurial aspects of this because they could see it was an emerging industry, but they didn't maybe have the technical or neuroscience understanding. And then none of them really had any opportunity to learn about the neuroethical issues, even though that field was also emerging alongside all of this. And I thought, how do we create a program that sort of fits all of these things? And I didn't really know quite how to approach it. And but I got a SHIRK grant, which is a social science and humanities grant, to host a conference where I thought I could bring together people professors from the different departments, industry leaders, policy people, and we called it a Neurotech Future, Ethical, Legal, and Policy Issues. And we were going to have this in person, and I got this grant back in 2019, and then of course the pandemic hit, and we ended up having it on Zoom, which was great. And remember back then when Zoom webinars were like a brand new thing, and that was great because we actually had more reach, and we had, as part of the goals, the output goals of that grant was to ideate what a program might look like. And so I pulled together in a workshop lots of people from different departments, and we thought, oh, maybe we could take a course from electrical engineering and a course from neuroscience. And it turned out it just wasn't going to work. They weren't designed to work together in any way. They didn't have prerequisites. It was going to be extremely complicated. So I left that quite dismayed that it wasn't going to be easy. And then all of a sudden, I don't know if you know Graham Moffat. He used to be the CTO for Interaxon Muse, the Muse headband. He's a Canadian. And he was a key industry advisor I had on this grant, actually, initially. And he said, hey, there's this funding opportunity from the province of Ontario. They're looking to create new microcredential programs for emerging industries. And he said, that's what you need to make. And then anyone could take it from anywhere. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Okay. So I applied for the grant and we got it. So cool. And this required that we have some kind of an industry or nonprofit partner. And I partnered with Neurotech X. which of course was out of Montreal, so a Canadian nonprofit that had been growing like crazy at that time, with chapters popping up all over the world for neurotech enthusiasts to sort of innovate together. And they have student clubs, and I had been working with the Neurotech X student club here at Queen's University, and that was really my inspiration as well. These were a lot of engineering students, and I said, oh, hey, like, do you guys actually need some neuroscience lectures? And they said, yeah, that'd be great. Like, we can't access your neuroscience courses. So I started giving sort of Neuro 101 to engineers. And that was really how it began. So we started, we got this funding. I suddenly had to bring together really top postdocs who had the expertise in these different aspects, technical aspects, neuroimaging, neuroelectronic recording and processing. And we had Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting all through the pandemic, starting to create these online courses. And I partnered with our Office of Educational Scholarship and Professional Development, OPDES, one or the other. And they had been making online courses at Queen's University, which actually has the first all online pre-med sort of Bachelor of Health Science program. And we had been working on that the last 10 years. So we had really gained a lot of expertise of making high quality online courses. So we created, we have now 3 courses that have been running for a year. The first is the Neuroscience and Neurotech Primer. And the second is Neuroelectronic Recording and Processing, which was developed by Gerard O'Leary, who had done a PhD in neuroengineering at U of T, University of Toronto, and now has his own neurotech company. And a couple of other postdocs who are from Western University in London, Ontario, who helped create the neuroimaging course. So we launched those 3 courses, launched the program because the grant had quite a timeline. And but the jewel of the program was really to create neurotech teaching labs where students could come on campus after they had taken some of these online courses and then really get their hands dirty with the equipment itself and actually learn what the limitations of it were, how you actually get good, clean data, all the noise issues. They could actually put what they'd learned into practice and do that in a project basis. So we called this a capstone project course. And so we hosted our very first one this past May. And it was an experiment in teaching, to say the least. And we had people come from all over the world, Australia, because Mark was there, of course, Israel, Roy came from Israel, Anastasia from London, England, and a variety of people, students from our local area. And it was an amazing experience.
It was. I mean, it really, I have to say, it was it's not just the capstone, the whole micro-credentials course. I've taken the first 3 units, and it's a proper high quality university level course. Sometimes I find when one looks at online courses from universities, they don't quite always capture that standard you expect. This one does. And then the capstone project itself was fantastic. I learned lots, but it wasn't just the quality of the actual course. It was the environment. It was a very welcoming, warm, nurturing environment. You felt like, I think we all felt very, very warm and happy and settled here for the 2 weeks we're here. And also me as a patient, I mean, I rocked up with Parkinson's, like, I wonder how it'll go. I had never been felt so welcome and so comfortable as being here. It just wasn't an issue.
It was
good.
It was amazing how when you throw a bunch of strangers together in a room and you say, okay, you're going to be here like 12 hours a day. We're going to have you're going to be living in residence together. You're going to be working in the lab, eating meals together. People bond very tightly. It was like summer camp.
It was.
And
people were crying the last day when we left.
And it's 2 weeks, Susan?
Yes.
2 weeks. Okay, so people take an online course that's a bit longer, and then they meet together. And I mean, what impressed me is the equipment you bought for this, right? So you have top level equipment. Was that all part of this grant, or can you talk a bit about
so
the devices
the
you
grant? In a way, it was a teaching grant that I kind of was able to transform the budget to make it a bit of an equipment grant. So we were able to bring in, like a Nyrex FNIR system, We also have a variety of EEG tech. GTech has been a supporter of the program, and we got an education box from them, so we could have multiple students using different EEG devices. Of course, Muse devices, the Muse sleep device, and different things like that we have as well. But of course, we have already some core equipment that we use in this as well. There's two companies here in Kingston, Thea Markerless, which is really the top-notch markerless motion capture for biomechanics and gait. And we have a Thea lab that's affiliated right here in the space where the students do their work. Of course, they use that to measure Mark's gait. And also Queen's is the home of the Kinarm robotic labs. So the Kinarm robot's a very mature technology for neurological assessment. I don't know if you've seen one, but this is a robotic exoskeleton where has precise measurement and control of your arm movements as you do sensory, motor, cognitive tasks in a virtual reality space. Cool. And so the Kinarm is sort of gold standard for stroke clinical trials, so for clinical research, where you want to actually have something more precise than, just touching your nose as a measure of motor function. And of course, Steve Scott, who founded Kinarm as a professor here, is actually our Vice Dean of Research. He was very supportive of this program, and we have access to a Kinarm that's in the same building here as our Neurotech Discovery Lab.
And the MRI machine as well.
And of course, we have a 3T Prisma Siemens MRI that is for research purposes only, and we can access that as well. Wow, so fantastic. Yes, it was a way of how do we though use all of this amazing equipment we have here at Queen's University as to enhance our teaching offerings.
Yeah, and so how many people? So to be clear, just to emphasize that I could apply, I could enroll in this in theory.
Yes, you certainly
could. Anybody can. And then how many people are students from Queen's, and how many are external for this program, Jeff? Roughly?
Right. So this was a surprise. So most people that have signed up have just taken the first course, the Neuroscience and Neurotechnology primer. And this is a great course. We go through 4 modules. The first one is sort of an introduction to neuroscience. The second one, we talk about neuroprosthetics, cochlear implants, retinal implants, BCIs. And then we move to neuroimaging, and we do an overview of that. And then we end with neurostimulation, of course, talking about invasive types like DBS and spinal stim, and then the non-invasive array, increasing array that keeps happening. I felt like as I was making that module, new things were being released all the time. So that course, we've had about 75 students, I think, enroll in that. And it is, rigorously assessed. There are assignments that are within the learning management system that are affiliated with the course that they do, and they have to report on these in quizzes. They are marked by a TA, and then we have most of the grade isn't the performance on an oral exam that's done over Zoom. And this is so that we can see people's ID, make sure it's the same person who signed up for the course before we issue the microcredential, which is effectively a badge that they can display on their LinkedIn. Cool. So of those people that have joined, I would say what surprised us was that probably more than half were from outside of Canada. And this was interesting. It was I was making this program for the province of Ontario, and yet only about half of our enrollment was from Ontario. Interesting. And otherwise, a very interesting. We've done some of the demographics now because we needed to report on that for the grant. And it's, a fairly good representation of women, which made me very happy. There was also probably about 40% women, I think. And then, for backgrounds, it was a lot of people from sort of engineering, a very mixed bag, actually, of backgrounds. What surprised me the most is I thought it would be mostly undergraduate students. And in the end, I would say about half were from not enrolled, like they weren't current students. Mm-hmm. They were either in industry and they were looking to maybe laterally move into the neurotech industry, or they were recent graduates and they were trying to decide whether they wanted to maybe go to grad school or whether they wanted to get into industry. Or sometimes it was people that were in industry that were thinking about going back to grad school, but they'd been out of undergrad for some time, and they were
Sure.
nervous about whether they could go into a neuroscience grad program. And it also, for someone like that, this program can also then provide them with access to an academic reference, which can be a bit of a sticking point with getting into grad school.
Sure.
And you've
then-
had a couple of patients as well.
And and the biggest surprise, of course, was having patients like Mark, who was one of the earliest students that enrolled.
Mark, how did you hear about the program and what made you enroll? What compelled
Look,
you?
I think it was some, what we said, we're trying to figure this out. It was some webinar that was on it was about neuroethics or something like that. I'm trying to remember. It was a Canadian-based webinar that I signed up for and joined in for once, and this is about 2 years ago. And it mentioned the microcredentials, this microcredentials course. And I thought, well, it sounded interesting. And I looked it up, and well, I think it was just the first, just the primer, I think, had been released to launch the course. And because I wanted to, I guess it actually turned out to be a match for what I wanted to learn about. I mean, after DBS, I wanted to learn more about, we should talk about that in a moment, but I wanted to learn more about DBS. But it's not easy if you're just, okay, you can buy a couple of textbooks, but just sitting reading a textbook by oneself in one's living room is not the easiest way to learn. And so when I saw this course, let's be a good introduction, and it was. So I was lucky to just find it online by, like I say, attending this webinar once, but it really just hit the nail on the head for taking me through it, actually explaining in nice, clear, I won't say simple terms, but nice, clear terms, about the topic I wanted to learn about. But I have to say, in terms of the rigorous examination, they certainly are. I mean, for each course, at the end of the course, it's an hour and a half quizzing by two or three professors. You got to actually, one of the courses, the neuroimaging, I didn't have enough time to finish it, and I thought, God, I'm glad I passed. I thought I was going to fail.
It was pretty dodgy, Mark.
I got about 3/4 of the way through the course. In the last quarter, I just whizzed through, and I said, "Oh God, I'm going to fail this." But that's that shows you the standard where you have to put in. If you're not going to make the effort, it's not some sort of just tick a box, do a couple of multiple choice quizzes, and that's it. You have to learn.
It's actually an actual course. Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah, and this is where I wanted to differentiate the program, because there was a lot of things popping up where you could watch some YouTube videos and whatnot, but there was no assessment.
Yeah.
And so I knew that industry wouldn't really trust it. Like, how could students put that on their CV?
Sure. Yeah. I once did the one of the most original courses from Coursera, which was on AI, I think by Andrew Ng, one of the, it's a famous course, I think, and there were also assessments, and I remember that was really also quite tough. So some modules were quite tough. They had this, what was also super cool is to see how, like in the board where you could discuss with fellow students who else applied, and it was lots of people from Africa and from all over the world. So so I think you're building something really valuable there, right? That could go a long way and already went a long way. I think one thing that makes it different is that capstone project. So people have to fly in, or can they choose to only do the online?
Yeah. So yes, the whole vision for that was it would be in person. And we did actually debate a lot about that, because this, of course, was being ideated during COVID. And we had learned that it was actually possible to do some things remotely. And of course, I participated in some of these hackathons nowadays, and those are often online. You've got sort of some people on your Zoom screen, but there is a kind of magic that happens when everyone's in person. And one of so I interviewed a lot of people from industry about what they would want in grads, or what students were missing that would help them, help me train up good employees for them. And one of the things that made me laugh was one person said, "Can you teach them how to hustle?" I'm like, oh, I don't know. Well, I can try. But then we realized what really the team-based, project-based learning opportunity we could do here was an opportunity to teach about project management, team building, all within the context of having to work together. And this was something we decided to focus on. So for the first week of the capstone project course, we actually had little workshops on topics related to this. And we did a lot of the team building exercises. And then, these ideation brainstorming sessions. And this, I think, was what made people bond together. And it felt so intense because it happened all so fast. I mean, in the end, the data that we collected from Mark, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, everybody was just getting to know each other. And then it was sort of ideated. Well, a lot of it, in Mark's defense, was he had proposed this to me. Unlike any of the other students, like about 4 months before the course, he had sent me draft one of his research proposal for the capstone.
Let's dive
And I think we got to draft 6 before he arrived.
Let's dive into that. Mark, you took the course, enrolled, and then thought I could do experiments on my own brain with my own DBS system and made that proposal. How did you come up with that? Why were you interested in it? Yeah.
Look, so again, it's just to take a step back. One of the things that has, I guess, caused me a little concern is the whole DBS programming. And it's something people focus on DBS, the surgery. You have the surgery, it takes a day or two, it takes multiple weeks to recover from, but then you maybe live with DBS the next 20 or 30 years. And that's where the focus should be. And I also think with the choosing the settings, the right settings per individual, and individualizing the settings is non-trivial. And I do think we really don't put enough effort into that. And so and that's not intended to be critical of anyone or any system, but rather, if you take Parkinson's, which is very much a disease that many manifests in many different ways with different people, and you take modern DBS systems, and a few 100,000 possible combinations of settings to try to tune the setting for that each individual. We haven't really cracked that, and I do think that is a concern. And I know people around the world now who've had DBS and who have got real difficulties. And I just think, I wonder if it's just the programming. The DBS system's well implanted. It's a good technology, but have we actually individualized that for that person? And I think sometimes we haven't, and that's why perhaps they've got issues. And that was me at the start. When they first my doctors tried to configure the DBS system, it really just didn't work for me. If I can call it I'm going to say, when you try the standard settings, and not that it really is very much standard settings, the 130 hertz, 60 microsecond pulse width, and then you do some sort of monopolar review, that didn't quite work. And so I ended up not being able to speak clearly. And I don't just mean the Irish accent, I mean, I would just not be able to even finish a sentence. I go to the park and try to get some exercise, maybe fall over 10 times in half an hour. This is in the weeks following DBS. So it's just not working at all. And so I started reading up and just trying to read the medical literature and think, okay, that sounds like that's a patient, or that's advice for the symptoms I have, and they're making suggestions to my doctors. And I don't, by the way, I don't make the easiest of patients, as you can probably imagine. But and so working with my doctor, being proactive and doing experiments at home to time myself, actually how different settings could be tweaked, and maybe the current strength could be tweaked to just get it right for me. So I could see it was a lot of effort to do that. And I guess I wanted to just learn more and also try to help others, maybe perhaps not directly, but just by pushing forward in terms of the programming. So that was the motivation. And yes, I saw the capstone project as an example, as an opportunity to involved in a really good program with access to excellent equipment and being taught how to use that equipment. And yeah, so they were the drivers, and I thought, okay, how can we do this? But again, I didn't self-medicate. So I rehearsed about 4 different base program configurations for the project. I then went to my neurologist, who then looked at them and checked them from a safety point of view and made a couple of tweaks. There's a couple where I had the option for the increasing the current a bit too high, and he said no. And so we made a bit of compromise, and then he set them to my patient programmer so I could control them, those 4 options. So we very much got buy-in from that from my neurologist, and then here I was proposing to test myself. But what really interested me was I didn't know if the other students would be interested. So I got up as one of 15 students on day one, I think it was day one, to say, okay, this is what I'd like to do. Thinking, I wonder if anyone will want to join me. And basically, it wasn't an entire class, it was about
Well,
11 or 12.
everybody
So-
was involved in the Mark project at some point.
And so I told
sure.
him to be a project leader for like a week, and we just basically try to coordinate all these activities, and some things worked and some didn't. But
Yep.
but it was really, it was just excellent actually. Happy given the opportunity and have people buy into the process.
Yeah, there became many sub-teams of students who would specialize on one measurement. So we had a gait sub-team who became masters of the Thea Markerless system for mocap, and then another group that really focused on and worked with NIREX, especially Andrew. Andrew from NIREX was an angel in this. He came and gave them all like a coaching session, and we got that up and running. And so they were the master of that, Alona and Maddie.
Yep.
And then another ones that were sort of focused on kin arm, and they became the masters of the kin arm. So they each had their own project goals. These small teams of students, 2 or 3, but they were all building to this bigger project.
And we don't leave out
Mark
the
project.
lead DBS.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
We also had a few people working on the lead DBS, but as you know,
Anastasia and Natalie.
And so as you know, Andres, from actually trying to work with me on my scans, there are a bit unusual artifacts in there, and so we've had some difficulty reading it in the DBS, and so that bit of the project I guess didn't get completed. So, and there's also the ethics assessment of the idea of doing this as a
That's true. So we had some students that dove into the neuroethics literature, and they presented a little bit at the end. And that was actually at the end. Once we collected the data, they basically had to do a preliminary analysis, something to create a slide. And then we called in all sorts of our industry supporters, and they were very kind. Even Christoph Guger from GTech and the CEO of NIREX, and it was great. And they all came in a Zoom screen, and the students then had to practice their presentation skills by actually presenting the project to them.
Super
and
cool.
they asked
Super
very
cool.
difficult questions of them. It was good.
This is really such a fantastic project from so many angles, and it was initiated by you, Mark. You are the lead investigator,
Yes.
together with Susan as maybe the supervisor, and you it was your brainchild, but then you presented it, and many students wanted to work. Obviously, that's such a cool opportunity for the students as well. Working with patients and patient data is always considered a fantastic privilege in neuroscience, and so you gave them that privilege, but also could pursue your own goals. So I think that's really fantastic. We should also talk about bringing in more like patients into research more in a second. I want to just highlight one more time what you just said. This was first of all IRB approved. We can maybe also briefly talk about that, but then also you did have your neurologist give you 4 programs that you could adjust. So this was not, as you said, not self-medication. You didn't hack the system or anything. It was like all medically approved. But nonetheless, this is a fantastic project where you took the initiative, flew over from Australia, and then met the students. When I saw you both speak in New York, some of the students were there too. I saw in the end they hugged you as well. So I think you also bonded there in that research team. And I saw your research poster, which looks fantastic. So maybe we should unpack this briefly, if you want, Susan, talking about the IRB around this, because it's an unusual idea to study one's own brain, and then
Yes.
if you want to talk about the science as well, what you actually did.
Sure. It was an interesting thing to navigate with our research ethics board. So it was, I think, a really great example of collaboration with the REB. So I knew this was going to be a challenge early on before we hosted the Capstone Project course, because how are we going to get ethical approval for the students to come up with their own projects and then actually execute them?
Yeah.
in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
If we had to, in the middle, somehow go through an IRP process. So that was going to be basically impossible. So I worked with them and said, how can we do this? So what we did was develop an umbrella ethics framework for the Neurotech Discovery Lab for teaching purposes. So this umbrella ethics covered all of the equipment we had procured for the lab, and it could be used in any combination. So you could use FNIRS with KinArm, or you could use, with FNIRS with Thea, and you could do it in the context of a sort of sensory, motor, and cognitive tasks, as long as they didn't have these different things involved. So there were sort of some guardrails around what could be done, and the students so that they still got to experience the process and the importance of getting ethical approval for a study, which I thought was a really important skill that they needed to be aware of and they needed to be part of. So they have to, first of all, before they arrived, they all had to complete our Canadian Tri-Council online course on ethical conduct for research involving humans. This is our TCPS2 course. And they all had to submit before they arrived that they had their certification of completion. And so that was a requirement. And then when they got here and they had ideated their project, they had to write an amendment that described who was going to be involved in the project, what the project was, what equipment it was going to use, and who was going to be involved. And they had to then submit that as an amendment to our umbrella protocol. And the review of that amendment is then delegated to the REB staff. The ethics board staff, and they would then review and approve it. And they knew they were coming, and we gave them heads up, and they allocated staff time to say, okay, we're going to go through all these on the Wednesday, and we'll have them approved by the end of day Thursday kind of thing. Yeah. So that was the only way it was going to work. But I think it reached the goals of making sure that we were doing ethically responsible research, and also that the students got the experience of actually applying for a simplified version of an ethics proposal.
Very nice. And then what did you do, like, scientifically? I think we didn't talk about this yet. You had these 4 programs, and then you tested them in various ways.
Why don't we talk about it? Yeah. And I like to say that it really was Mark's project. Then I was the facilitator. Okay. And so I'll let you describe that, and maybe we can both talk about what we thought we found.
Yep. Okay. Well, I guess the starting point was really to think through about the from a DBS programming perspective. And like I said, I think from my experience and observations in DBS clinic, that there are things like the frequency, the number of DBS pulses per second, and also often the pulse width as well of each pulse are not really considered much. I mean, they're really, sometimes they are, but it's mostly just which electrode context and which strength, and you set 130 hertz and 60 microseconds. And I'm not saying that's for everyone, but they are not exploring. Certainly the DBS frequency parameter, we don't seem to understand well how that works, in my opinion. You can think of the pulse width and the current strength and the electric charge delivered. We get that bit. But the downstream effects of changing the DBS frequency, I don't think we understand yet. Of course, that doesn't mean it's not important. It just means we don't understand it. And in my case, where I got to was I'm on a dual frequency setting. So the configuration of my DBS leads is 179 hertz starting in the most ventral segments. It's SSS10 DBS. And with the mid-tier, anterior and mid-tiers, they're at 60 hertz. And which I think is an unusual combination itself of that dual frequency setting. So I wanted to explore the impact of, in particular, DBS for changing the DBS frequency parameter on gait, because that seems to be something that is notoriously difficult to get gait well supported. And I think changing the frequency parameter can have a significant impact. So that's what I wanted to test. Now, how do you go about testing that, of course? And the markerless motion capture system, I think, was very, very good for letting you accurately see what is happening from a gait and a movement point of view. So that's why we wanted to use that. But the other core, and this is what you, I think, suggested, was using the functional infrared spectroscopy device sort of look at the what's happening in the cortex when you change your DBS settings. And of course, you're not actually looking down into where the DBS electrodes are.
Yeah.
You're just looking at the inner cortex. But the element of saying, okay, let's look and see in different DBS settings, we can measure using the markerless motion capture which DBS settings support gait and which don't. And then we can say, well, what's happening in the cortex during that time? And so that was what we ended up looking at, not knowing how we're going to get, but just saying, well, there must be some, maybe there's going to be some difference that shows up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the interesting thing. That looked like maybe, and that's why we're back this week to have a further look at that. There's perhaps a signal that you can detect, because when you had that functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the motor cortex, that seemed to relate to DBS settings that didn't support walking. And that makes sense if you happen to, the way I look at it from a lay person is, if you're having to think about walking, and when sometimes if I'm on DBS settings where they're not really helping, I have to really concentrate trying to get myself moving. You don't just stand up and walk. It's really, really quite a focused effort to do that. Then that's why perhaps you'd see that connectivity.
Yeah. It was quite curious. Like, so for the settings that impaired motor function, he appeared to have greater functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and motor cortex. And it sort of seemed to jibe with his experience of what this sort of feeling like there was greater cognitive load. I'm not going to pretend we totally understand why this would be, but we first want to see if we can replicate it.
Yep.
And that's part of why Mark is here this week, backing things in
fantastic.
again for a nice reunion of our capstone group.
Yeah, really nice. And I mean, seeing the picture on the poster, it also involved a treadmill, right? So the gait was assessed on the treadmill. You had the FNIRS cap on while you were on the treadmill. Yep. You then, I think, had a very busy schedule every day, testing different sequences. You always, I think, took measurements at rest and then on the treadmill. Yep. So this was really a bigger endeavor, right? N equals 1 patient, right? But a lot of data points, and then I'm sure a lot of data to analyze for the students and for you and so on. So really fantastic. And remind me, you are together now. I know this. Is this another capstone project now, or is it an
it's
informal?
Almost like I think because people who were in the capstone project have all come to visit.
Yes.
Most of them. So we've got lots of people just dropping past. And but yeah, no, I guess there's a few students that did do a few undergraduate students from Queen's who were involved in the capstone, plus a couple of new student additions. And what we're trying to do, it's part of their final year project, I believe. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is just explore this a bit more, because it is, of course, N equal 1, but not only that, we didn't, I guess we could be a bit more rigorous in the design of the FNIRS experiment. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to do this time. And also just having a look at a few different setting configurations as well. Because, I mean, and then perhaps if it does look promising, the idea is that Queen to get some more, recruit some more patients.
Yeah.
Look at.
Yeah. So during the school year, so the capstone happens in May after the undergraduate students have left for the year, but we have this beautiful lab, and so during the school year, along with a couple of other young faculty, we were trying to come up with a new model to teach our undergraduate health sciences research methods and give them a research experience. And as our enrollment has grown, we need to really think outside of the box. So I said, this team-based research that we did in the capstone was really effective. How about we create a program where we have team-based research, where students come together in, say, teams of 4 or 5, and they're together for 8 months from September till April, and their end product is one big project. And all along the way, and a little more slowly than the capstone project course, but they learn these skills of team building, project management, of doing, getting IRB approval, all these steps. And then they also go through the process of having to learn how to operate and analyze data from this equipment in the context of their study. So we had a few of the students who had been part of the capstone were very enthusiastic about joining that course so that they could carry on the Mark project in a more fulsome way.
Is it officially called the Mark project in your day-to-day?
I hope not.
I call it the Mark. Well, we probably should call, I guess, the DBS settings project. Sorry.
Yeah, fantastic.
No, just, I mean,
And
I happen to be, I mean, Melbourne, Australia to Queens is uni is a bit of a distance, but I happen to be, I had to work, for last week in California. I had a project, my day job, a project I'm involved in, and I thought, like, I'm about 3/4 of the way there, so I thought, just LA to Toronto, about 4 hour flight, something like that. So I just jumped on that and took the week off work to come over. So, but it is, well, it's nice to be back. It's nice to work with, look, it's nice to work with the students and actually, see people learn. And it's not just it's not just the research, it's having an influence on the educational aspect, and well, hopefully having a positive influence.
Oh,
and letting
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been on Zoom calls with these 5 students that are part of the school year team, and that we call it the Discovery Labs. And they're just, he's almost a co-supervisor to this team. It's been really wonderful.
It's a bit scary, actually. but yeah, so it's nice to be here and work with them. And I guess you do the skills and the softer skills that Susan's discussing, the team building and project management as well. I guess, yeah, it is interesting to see the undergrads. They haven't really had much exposure to this yet. And we ran through a few management things this morning with them, actually. But I was grading them how they were going with different elements. And, there was some things you got to learn, but you learn by doing. And I think it's really, in terms of them getting ready for finishing their degrees and going out to work, it's really great experience.
No, it's so true. I mean, it's navigating these educational aims that we have to, obviously we're training these students, they're very inexperienced, but they're learning rapidly along the way. And Mark has been, is patient and very much is acting as a mentor to them. And of course it's coming from, he's a CEO. So, they listen to him when he talks to them about, how they should be working on a team and what they should be doing. And I think they're getting an incredible educational experience because they're getting sort of the neuroscience aspect from me, but they're getting this incredible mentorship from an industry leader, from Mark.
Super cool. And
he's a patient too.
Yeah. We've met on one occasion where I also got to talk to them a bit, and I felt like they were already super mature, asked really good questions, and led the discussion and so on. So you already did a fantastic job, and they're great students, I think. So you mentioned in New York that, Susan, you also, maybe based on this experience, identified that it's key as a teaching opportunity or learning opportunity for students to also get involved in contact with patients. And you had other patients come speak in the course, right? So I know Ben Stecher was there, but maybe you can talk a bit about that experience also, or why, how you motivated that and how that worked.
Yeah, so I was always, I've always tried to incorporate guest lectures in the past in my regular school year courses. So I think I'm trying to figure out when I first met Ben Stecher. It feels like it's been a long time, but I think it's only been about a year and a half at most. But I don't know if I met him at a conference, but at any rate, we ended up chatting a lot, and I had been teaching about DBS. I teach a course on the neurobiology of learning and memory, which I integrate a lot of neurotech in, so the students can learn about that. And I actually had him come in and give a lecture to my 4th year class to provide students with this patient perspective of what it's like to be living with the implantable tech, neurotech. And, it's an incredible experience for the students. I mean, a lot of them want to go to med school, and to be able to actually talk with a Parkinson's patient who has DBS, who can talk about that experience and tell his life story, I think was profoundly moving for a lot of them. I don't think they get enough exposure to that. And yes, a lot of them will volunteer in the hospital and in different ways. But having it integrated into your teaching, I think, is really, really amazing. And so Ben actually was here on Monday. He came just to see Mark, and he wanted to observe. And I think you made a nice post on LinkedIn yesterday. And also we had Kevin Critchie, thank you. I wanted to mispronounce that right. Kevin Critchie, who's actually an executive at Fujitsu, who, like Mark, has Parkinson's disease. And he is I wasn't really aware that this was the thing, but he identifies as a quantitative selfer.
Yeah, something like that.
Quantitative selfer. So these are patients and people who actually are using all sorts of these wearable neurotech devices. Neurotech, we can call it the broader spectrum of neurotech, but wearable devices that are monitoring heart rate variability and whatnot, and they're tracking all sorts of data on their symptoms. So I guess as we have more and more patients that are getting Parkinson's young, that have families and careers, and they really want to live their best lives with this disease and continue to work. And that is the power of DBS, as I've come to see. That's been my experience. I mean, I was never an expert on DBS before. Of course, I've taught about it. I integrated it in the Neurotech program. But I mean, I remember, 15, 20 years ago, actually being a little skeptical about DBS when I was postdoc. Is this just placebo effect? How is this working? We didn't really have a mechanism. And, so seeing it and seeing what a profound difference it makes in your quality of life is an experience that I'll never forget. And I know it's been profound for the students as well. But yeah, Kevin was here because he wanted to baseline himself. And we were able to get an amendment in to get approval for that he could baseline himself before he gets his DBS implanted next month.
And interesting. Then wow. Okay.
And then he can hopefully come back in a few months after that, and he can be do another DBS settings sort of exploration like we did with Mark.
Fantastic. And I did see one post of Ben that showed you, Mark, kicking a football back in the day very well. Like you balanced with how do you call that in English? So you balanced the football in the air.
Yeah, keep it up, yeah.
So how do you know Ben? And you used to play a lot of football back in the day, or still do?
Oh, so I wouldn't I'm not much of a sports person actually. So I love a kick at a soccer ball, but and actually we joined in a game here during the week, and at lunchtime to the park, and these guys playing a match, and they invited us to join in. But that was a bit of fun. But no, I mean, look, it's I know Ben from I think again. Oh yeah, I think it was just online. We met online through LinkedIn. You see someone's post, whatever, and connect that way. Sure. And then I actually got to see him in person just over a year ago in Barcelona at the World Parkinson's Congress there. I got to say hello to him. But and then we just kept in touch since the power of LinkedIn and other social media platforms. So, and that's because he again another patient with DBS who's quite interested, not just being sitting back, but actually wanted to be more active and involved and thinking about the information and sharing the story, and same as myself. So I guess that's why we connected them. And but yeah, he took a picture of me, a video of me with a juggling a soccer ball there a few days ago.
But so that was now.
I felt that was Monday.
Wow, I did think that was an old video. Wow, you are skilled. I didn't realize that. Wow, fantastic.
But
that's the power of DBS.
Yeah.
on the right settings.
I'll just And of course, Andres, when we met, that was back in New York at the conference a few months ago, and my walking collapsed, and it was really bad. And I'd been good most of the year. And if one goes to a conference full of neurologists, and of course, one just all of a sudden has quite, I don't know, it's just being conscious of it and thinking of it.
I don't know, maybe it was New York. Maybe it was
like you fly to the other side of the world, you get off a plane, you're jet lagged, and then it's a busy city to have to walk around. But no, I've been pretty good this year. Most of the year been pretty good. Well, you've seen me back in May, and then in New York, and then this week. And my walking's been pretty good apart from in that week in New York, basically.
You're so much better than you were in New York. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah. But so I'm on the same setting. But yeah, so you do sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bulletproof. That get the right settings and you're fine. It's you get in the plane, fly for many hours, and then get off in a different time zone. It may take you a week or two to get better, and you get to adjust. So, but pretty much I have to say that most of this year has been pretty good.
And so similar to the requirement for, or the necessity that students should have patient contact, I think we also, and you guys talked about this in New York too, we also all agree that if there's interest, patients should also be involved in research, and not just maybe as participants, but also as stakeholders and as, even directing research like you, or being involved, getting their voices heard. You talked about this, Susan, quite a bit, that you also thought about this. Maybe you want to start sharing your thoughts about it, and then, of course, we want to hear Mark's thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so, this isn't something that I had done. I mean, if I look back, I had, my research experience that was most clinically relevant was, developing a monkey model of Alzheimer's disease. And of course, I've never interacted with any Alzheimer's patients to think about whether this was going to be a meaningful model or anything. And I think that, was probably a mistake, but I think that's very typical of basic bench scientists. You don't get those experiences. But I think I can also talk about, but it's different for PD. I mean, these are patients that are often extremely intelligent and articulate and are still young. And they actually are the only ones that, particularly those ones that have DBS, that have really an insight into their condition.
Yeah.
And so they should be. Why wouldn't we want to spend more time asking them what are the important research questions that they think will really drive patient care? And that seems it's not going to work for every kind of disorder, but certainly I think for Parkinson's disease, we should be spending way more time talking to patients like this. And I know that Ben Stecker has, with all of his interviews with scientists all over the world, he's been railing about this for years, that, why are we studying certain things that don't even seem to relate to his experience with the condition? Yeah. And, sometimes scientists can get stuck in their theories, and, it becomes a paper mill of like trying to identify mechanisms and whatnot. But in the end, is that going to help with patients and their families? Sometimes when you ground yourself that way, it changes your perspective. I can give my personal experience with inclusion in research as the parent of a child with autism and intellectual disability. So one of my twins has autism, fairly severe, diagnosed as an infant, and but his twin brother does not. So I felt as a scientist that I had a profound responsibility to take twins, because they're such an important genetic experiment themselves, to put us through all of the autism genetic studies that were going on. We were in the Simon Simplex study. We were in the studies at University of Toronto, and there were other ones as well. And it was very time consuming. And
sure.
In the end, I mean, you don't really get compensated for it. Sometimes they don't even cover your travel. We were in clinical trials, and it's, at some point, I just got participant fatigue. Sure. And I think that as scientists, people should really be thinking about this all the time. How do we better support patient, family inclusion in this research process? So that's just at the participatory level. I mean, no one was even really asking us whether we even cared about having genetic therapy for our child, if it ever could become available. And of course, in the end, I don't think it'll ever really be a solution for autism. And yet billions of dollars were spent on figuring out, the couple of hundred of genes that seem to be involved. But is it going to be an actual therapeutic strategy anytime in the near future? Probably not. At least that's the way I feel. And then there's the other question of, actually, would parents want to have a genetic fix for their children as if they were broken? There are ethical questions here about how we talk about people who have conditions like this. And, autism self-advocates are quite furious at the research directions that have been taken. And there's been a lot of challenges between them. Well, billions were spent on all this, nothing, very little relatively was spent on practical therapies, improvements to the education system. I don't know.
Yeah.
So at that point, if there had been more discussion with families about what they really wanted, it might not have been like a genetic cure. And yet that's where all the money was funneled. So
Yeah.
that's
I
one thought.
sometimes feel, before we switch to hear Mark's opinion, I sometimes feel a bit like that too in PD research, where everybody's about a cure, right? There's so much money being poured into that, which typically means mouse research,
Yeah.
wet science research, genetics, and so on.
Often
All
doesn't
important
translate.
stuff,
Yeah.
but we have little wins from history where we came up with real therapies from, because the brain is simply complex, right? Where I mean, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do this, but the balance is very much, or the focus is very much on that, and not so much maybe on, let's say, DBS research or anything that would actually improve the lives of patients in our lifetime. So it seems a bit similar, right? Where I feel like if we'd ask patients more, including people like Ben Stecher or Mark, it would probably lead to a point to such an answer. Mark, what are you're the expert, and we, the two of us spoke first. Sorry about that, but what do you think on this whole topic?
Look, I think as a general point, yes, getting patients involved in whatever the condition and in the research is important, and listening, not just getting them involved, not just having them come in to, okay, please follow these instructions, but who actually writes the instructions? What are you measuring? What are you trying to solve? What's the issue you're trying to solve? So getting people involved from a patient perspective is very important. Obviously, I'm not saying most patients would want to be involved, but those who are, we should facilitate. But I do think with Parkinson's and DBS, but there's almost, we discourage people from wanting to know. I can remember when I first asked what my DBS settings were configured up, I was told that I shouldn't want to know. And I was thinking, why would I thought it was odd. But quite literally, I was told, no, you shouldn't want to know. And
So just to clarify that was something you said in New York too. You compared, when you take medication, they tell you what dose they give you, but if they program your DBS device, they don't tell you that you're now on 3.5 milliamps, right? So that is, I think, the comparison you took there. And that's a really good point, right? To me, that was eye-opening. I totally agree. If I were a patient, I would want to know, even though, maybe these numbers don't mean much to me. It's the same with milligrams, right? So just to clarify that for the listener as well, one more time.
Oh yes, like I said, it wasn't. And I'm not trying to be critical of an individual. It was actually a representative from the company. It wasn't my doctors. But I also know that it's not even designed so it's easy to get the information. If I look at my patient programmer, it gives me very limited information about what my settings are. So you can't, from the limited information on the patient programmer, figure out what your settings actually are. You can only do that on the neurologist's laptop. So you have to ask, and every time I've had programming changes, I ask for a copy, either a screenshot or a report from the neurologist's laptop. So it's not even easy to find out. You have to proactively ask. And I've had many examples where people have said, DBS patients have said to me that they asked their doctor, and the doctor's been hesitant to share the information. So I don't know why. But that's also what I've seen myself personally. So I do think it's important that we stop trying to hide the information. It doesn't mean that you need to have a physics degree, must be able to read through and understand it. But just like medication, if I'm given tablets, the doctor doesn't say take these 2 red tablets first thing in the morning. And if one says, what are they? They say, well, you shouldn't know. Of course you should know. That's the default. Not that you may never do anything better for me, but the default is you know. And so then I think that's one point. But I do think with DBS, because there's a lot of trial and error, we don't really understand. You understand some bits of how DBS works. I think it's fair to say that we're yet to really fully understand the DBS mechanisms at play and how they interact with the human brain. It's not an easy thing to figure out. It's not a surprise we don't understand. And in a clinical environment, there's lots of trial and error.
Yeah, it's going to be personalized. Obviously, it's going to never be in exactly the same position in each patient, because we all have different neuroanatomy. And so it's always going to be a personalized thing. So I think it makes sense that you would work with your doctor and understand what your settings were, understand what happens when they move. It is, after all, your brain.
And I do then think that, so if you're looking to individualize the DBS settings, then really getting, taking a very much a one-on-one approach, not to give all the answers, but for some pilot activities, doing the type of one-on-one, N=1 research here, I think is a sensible thing to do. But then I do think there's a general shift that perhaps required in how we approach DBS programming. Because it's not like it's the model of how you go see your doctor and you have 20 or 30 minutes in the room with the doctor, door closed. They listen to how you're going and then prescribe a dose of DBS or prescribe some medication. It doesn't seem to work in a setting where you've got so many options to choose from, and the disease is configured in so many different ways with the system that we don't really understand how it works. And so I do think that model of healthcare perhaps is not really taking advantage of the possibilities of DBS. And therefore I do think perhaps a changed approach where you are looking at more of more of a collective data set on DBS settings that work in different patients or whatever, and letting a bit of machine learning type systems work through that to make recommendation, and not just rely on the expert doctors. No, that's important. The expert clinician is an important element, but to rely on that as much as we do for DBS doesn't seem to work.
And not every patient has access to a Fasano like Ben Stecker has, right? Where they have this personal relationship where they're tuning regularly every 2 weeks. I mean, that's just not typical. So, I mean, it'd be wonderful if it was the same for everybody, but I don't think, I've learned from Mark at least that that's not typically what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with everything you both just said. To play the devil's advocate and maybe also to bring up, from my limited experience, I'm not seeing patients currently, but I did do like 3 years of where I also programmed DBS cases and so or patients. It is all true, but I think it can get problematic as soon as things like potentially hypomanic symptoms come in, right? Where these might feel good. For example, you've experienced that a little bit, where they're, because one option could also be a theoretical option to just, patients program themselves. They have a tool and, visuals and they optimize it themselves. If it were just about motor, that would work perfectly, right? If it's really just about, tremor and maybe speaking and so on. But as soon as these more effective components may come in, it's good to have a third party to evaluate things too. And that's why, and that's that territory where it gets so ethically interesting as well and complicated as well, right? Where, again, it's not really about not giving the patient autonomy about everything. It would be the same, Mark, if you would, were to program your, let's say, spouse, you would also feel like, oh, that is a bit too much, right? At some point it would be, so that is one point. And then I think the other point is, given that there are so many parameters, right? So as you've explained, I think what doctors sometimes want to avoid is to get into loops where, let's say, the patient would knock on their door every week, right? And say, it's not good enough, we can still optimize it further, right? I think that is something where, as I've heard from, colleagues, is something one wants to avoid, because you also want not just to save time, but also you want to have the patient enjoy their life and not obsess so much about optimizing the therapies all the time, right? So I think these are maybe 2 points where maybe this is coming from, right, originally. But sure I still very much agree with you that more transparency, more autonomy is still a very good thing and should be needed. Yeah.
But you cannot just, I'm not at all advocating for self-medication. So I think, it should be done in consultation with your doctor. And as you said, it'd be like, various drugs that can change people's mood and antidepressants and anxiety medication. You don't want to just go to your pharmacist and say, well, I feel like trying this medication today. Of course not. And it's the same with DBS. It should be done in consultation. And I do also take the point of saying, but you also want to, it's not it's a healthcare system, so it has to optimize how doctors are treating a population, and one must design the program for that. So again, and that argues for what exactly you want to share with the patient, because it's not even just to get people's hopes up. But I would say that that's fine. So I agree with that point. but only to an extent. I mean, really, when it gets to the point that, oh no, we better not then tell them what DBS settings they're on,
No,
even
you're right.
ask. I
Absolutely.
mean,
No,
so it goes, it's one extreme to the other, I guess. But oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm not advocating self-medication, and it's got to be a system, a process for a population, not for individual. But I still think there's a lot of things we could move forward on, a lot of things we could make better to get more value out of the technology. It's wonderful technology, but yet
Yeah.
we're not getting perhaps as much out of it as we should.
I think it's a bigger like healthcare system issue. How do we track? How can we have more telemedicine? You know, maybe this is where like wearable technologies and systems like Rune Labs might come into play, and you know maybe that could be tracked you know by another sub-technical profession who has expertise in this as DBS becomes more ubiquitous.
Yeah, I totally agree. Or even some, more or less closed loop programming where you would be in a box that monitors your, big box of course, but that monitors the symptoms, tests different algorithms. So I think there's a lot to be done also with sensing coming. So I think there is a lot in the future where we would need more patient engagement, but we would want to, of course, have that. But then also where maybe things could become a bit more transparent, a bit more visualized, a bit more, not as black boxed as they seem in some clinics today. All right, so I'm putting you on the spot here, Mark, because this is not a question I had prepared, but in New York, there was another talk by a patient that I'm going to interview next week, Jim McNasby, and he had a wish list for DBS. So would you have a wish list? Would you have spontaneous things of what we would need to improve?
I think from a wish list point of view, it would really be to spend more time programming. When I look at the effort and energy and the focus that goes into the surgery, and I mean, obviously the surgery is important. If you don't get the surgery right, then you kind of no point spending time programming. But the effort and energy and focus on that, the effort that's been expended in developing this technology that you're talking about delivering, with sub-millimeter precision, electrical pulses into the center of the brain with a single milliamp again accuracy precision level. I mean, you're talking about a very, very impressive technology. It's taken many years to get this far. You go through the operation, and then I've spoken to some individuals where it's a case that you can just see they have a few hours of programming and off you go. And a year later, they can't speak at all. And you have to talk to their wife or husband to be able to communicate with them. And I'm thinking after all that, all the effort and energy to get this wonderful technology, develop the technology, get in place in someone's brain, and then for the sake of an extra maybe 10 or 15 hours of a skilled effort in terms of programming, and I'm not trivializing it, that's a significant effort. But wow, it's only maybe an extra 1 or 2% of the total effort being gone through to get the benefits. And I think that's what I would like that to happen, because I've seen the power of it with myself. Getting settings, once you get a configuration that works, I can walk, I can talk, I can keep my job. Life changing. And with people who just don't get the effort on the configuration of the settings, they don't get that sometimes. And I think that would be my wish. My one
Fantastic.
wish.
Thank you. What advice would you give to other Parkinson's patients who are considering DBS?
I think that, there's a couple of things. I think, as you said, I would say every time you get your DBS settings adjusted, make sure your neurologist gives you a copy of your settings, just on principle. You should know what you've had to try. Even, when I'm in Parkinson's support groups and activities I sometimes go to, people share their information about their medication, and people are talking about what they tried. Oh, I've tried this, and they're actually almost educating each other by sometimes very informative discussion with taking medication times and combinations. Oh, you suffer from this, I've tried that. But they can't do it with DBS if you don't know what you've tried. So I do think patients having this information that they can almost share with each other is a good thing. So I would do that. But if you're thinking about getting a DBS, having DBS surgery, yes, pay a little bit of attention and thought to the surgery, but it's got to be, the focus has got to be on living with the DBS device. So if you're going for a well-respected surgeon and surgical team to do the procedure, great. But then who's going to be with you for the next 10, 20, 30 years of living with the device? And I think that you get more focus as well.
So focus on the neurologist, not just the neurosurgeon, essentially,
Yeah,
right?
just not just, and almost the neurologist, but also the process. So what do you? I mean, it depends. Again, if someone's living in a remote community, are they going to have a system that can be easily changed? Like the Abbott, I think the Abbott system now, we can get the system easily settings changed remotely, for example. It's just what's going to work for you. And I think people don't seem to think about the living with it. They think about getting through the surgery, but not necessarily the focus. And I'd say, so I've always said to people when I'm in DBS support groups and people are thinking about DBS, don't just focus on the surgery. After you've had the surgery, it's done, it's once off, hopefully it's in the past. And then you live with it for the next 20 years. Make that, because that's the question to ask your neurologist about.
And I think that raises good points about this whole keeping patients at the forefront or including their voices in the research and medical delivery process. I mean, thinking about these people that are in rural communities and such, coming in for DBS programming sessions this is a problem. These are people that might not be able to drive. I mean, these are very challenging. It's just like the same issues I talked about with, including your family in clinical research. Thinking outside of the box of new ways where we could have remote programming, things like this. Like I think about another idea I had was about like RTMS for depression. So the way that's delivered, because I have someone close to me that's gone through that, is literally going in every day for a 10-minute treatment.
Yeah.
And going back. And these are people that can't usually get out of bed, and they're being required to drive somewhere, And unless you live down the street from the psychiatric hospital or wherever this is being delivered, I mean, how is this a patient-friendly approach?
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good point. I mean,
did anyone co-create this with patients to see whether this is something that's actually sustainable? This is where the same protocol, doing it intensely for 5 days makes, maybe actually is a little more patient-friendly.
Yeah. I was about to say, I think at least there's a lot of development in the community to improve that, right? So Saint protocol is one idea to, do 5 days in a row. There's even protocols just for a single day now. And there are also startup companies that, think a bit more about portable devices and all that. So this might have still historical roots where that was the best thing we came up so far. But I think that these points are known to the community. So I still very much agree. This is, the closer you live to a hospital like, ours here or yours over there, then it's easy. And the two of you live in countries, Canada and Australia, that are quite distributed. So in these, you're totally right. Remote programming is much more important. There's one company focusing on that, right? I think that will come with all three companies sooner or later. I think in China as well, companies are doing remote programming. It's a very obvious thing, right, to develop. But also, there's then concern of, they call it brain jacking, right, of people hacking into the systems and so on. So
we talked about that in our primer course in the
sometimes it is amazing also to me how slow the progress is. I've 12 years into DBS research, and some things have changed, but not too much. And even my own stuff takes ages to maybe see patients at some point, right? So that is a big problem in medical research. On the other hand, it's also, there's a reason for it, right? That things take long because they have to be safe, they have to be approved.
But there's also the investment the company has. They don't want to change a product that's proved and working as well.
That is true.
There's instantly then a sort of a stalling.
There are many related issues to that problem, also to smaller disease, right? Rarer diseases such as OCD or so. It seems to work really well with DBS if the targeting is right, but there's not enough market there. So there has been a call recently from experts worldwide that say that essentially it's a crisis of success. We have the data that shows that it's working, but none of the device companies want to invest in this because it would be a lot of work. And if that doesn't even work for OCD, right? What about even rarer disorders, right? So I think you're totally right. There are lots of issues that need to be addressed in exactly what you've just said. So yeah, I don't want to defend the field. I think there's a lot of work going on, but on the other hand, I also see a lot of challenges. Yeah.
Well, I think there's this new movement towards like doing more co-creation with the community of users with products as a way. This is something that's sort of at the heart of a new initiative I'm part of called Connected Minds, Neural and Machine Systems for a Healthy Just Society. This is a big federally funded research program between New York University and Queen's University. And we've actually implemented co-creation into the whole NOI process. So this could be something, one way that patients could get more input into the research directions is if granting agencies simply forced researchers to have formalized co-creation ideation sessions with users.
Very, very interesting. I also, while we chatted, I thought about, we highlighted very much so now that input from patients would be helpful, right? And I think that applies to medical, like clinician scientists, and they have access to patients. They can just ask their patients, right? But it also applies to PhD PIs and PhD researchers that are in neuroengineering, are far off from the clinic. So there might even be a, business model here or a use case to network, making patient voices accessible to researchers that don't have access to them, right? So potentially somebody's listening that wants to set up a network where patients can even earn some money by this, but also research have facilitated access to patient interviews, let's say, or so, right? So because it might be even they might not even know where to begin, right? To find patients to talk to.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, very, very, very good points. Mike, I want to extend the last question a little bit. If you had to steelman the case against DBS for fellow patients, what would you say? So anything that you did not like about the process, or anything where you would feel like, in generally, I would recommend it, but these points are not great about it.
No, I mean, I do think it's trying to argue against DBS. I mean, look, first of all, it's not for everyone. I mean, it's not going to be suitable, even from the symptoms it tackles in Parkinson's or other. I mean, it's certainly used for other ailments as well. Now people are trying to find whether there's other conditions it can help with. So I think there are some experimental uses and proposed uses, but I think the key thing is it's not for everyone. And so don't have got Parkinson's, I should go get DBS. I think that's the first thing. But also there are small risks, and also from an age point of view. I mean, obviously someone maybe younger with more potential years in front of them, it's worth taking the risk. But I would also say medication, modern medications for Parkinson for many years can be very, very impressive. If you're on the right mix of medication, the right doses, and you pay attention to the advice and from the timing of the medication and stuff, you can get many, many years out of it. So if you're in your 70s, you've been diagnosed with Parkinson's, I mean, start with the meds. And also, perhaps I do think that's where some wearable devices to help optimize and measure what you're doing can be useful. Again, from a medication point of view. And actually, just with my Fitbit, I've done that for the years. Many years I've had data collected, and you can literally see, I would try to walk 10,000 steps a day. When you look at the number of days I managed to achieve that as opposed to ones I don't, and use it as a tracker, for a long-term tracker, for how I'm going in different slight doses of medication. Found that using that, for example, increasing my Cifril at one point, my doctor increased that, but it wasn't really working, and you could see it in the data. Yeah, so how to optimize your medication is not just how you feel, you got to sometimes measure it. So you focus on the medication. It's not, DBS is not for everyone, and the modern meds for Parkinson's are very impressive. I wouldn't hesitate if it is required, if it is going to make a difference, if the meds are no longer working, then yeah, do not hesitate. But it's not a cure, and it's not a solution for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Susan, what advice would you offer to educators or researchers that look to integrate patients into their academic programs or studies?
Well, I think if you want to meaningfully include patients and their families in the research, I mean, you have to be committed to developing a personal relationship with them that'll help foster that commitment. I mean, I'm not saying you have to become friends, like I sort of like to think Mark and I have become over this, but it's important to make sure that you're always conscious of their needs. This is one of the things I was trying to, to talk to the students about. It's like, okay, like, who's going to get lunch for Mark? We got to take care of our, he's contributing his time for you.
Yeah.
So always being conscious of, making sure you're taking care of them. I think that's really important. I think we could do a lot more with also finding ways to better have funding to I know it's complicated ethically, but to compensate them better. It also might mean strategies and other places, like where you go to them instead of making them come to your lab. So how can we do a better job as researchers of actually not forcing people to come in? Because that actually ends up getting a poor sample. Our sample characteristics they'll often, be of a certain, we're going to miss out on the diversity in our populations. This is something we've been thinking about, in that imagining having a mobile lab where we could take this stuff out to communities as opposed to making them come into the lab. How we can have more ideas about that. But also this idea, I think, of patients being part of co-creation. This is a real way, I think, that you can meaningfully include patients' voices. And this, as I said, sometimes you're best to ask the end users, what the solution, what kind of research do they actually want done? What are their actual pain points? I mean, this is where we're going to actually make the biggest impact moving forward. So yeah, I have a good example of that. I was in a co-creation process for a grant that was looking at, using neurotech for healthy aging in the community or something like this. And they actually had a bunch of elderly people in their 90s, 80s that were from different nursing homes, and also staff from those nursing homes that were part of this co-creation effort. And it was fascinating, their contributions and how strong their opinions were on, no, that'll never work. I've never used that. No one would. That's really valuable feedback to get early on in the grant development stage, right?
Very interesting. It's so obvious because, like, in the startup world, everybody always does that, right? And if it's about creating good products, people do that. But in research, you're totally right. We don't do it a lot. Yeah.
So we can do a better job of that. I mean, Mark's kind of a unique case, actually, including allowing someone to be the lead researcher in your lab that's also a patient. I mean, this is kind of an unusual experiment. I'm not. I think it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful collaboration. It's been so amazing for him to be present and help educate our students, and I'm very grateful for that.
But it can't be a model for every interaction. I totally agree. Not everybody would want to do that, of course, as a patient.
No, of course. I don't think everybody's interested in studying their own disease. But if they are, I mean, universities are places of learning, right? We're supposed to open them up for society, and we're taxpayer funded after all. At least in Canada. I don't know about all over the US, but
absolutely, no, makes sense. If there's one thing the two of you would hope for people to take away from this episode, what would it be? As a last question.
Look, I guess I'd probably direct it at the medical doctors. I think medical doctors should listen to their patients. And when I say listen, I mean seek to understand. And you try to engage. And when that doesn't work, then try a little harder. Because without really deeply engaging with the patient, it's hard to have that impact. And I say that about I think highly of medical doctors. My wife's a medical doctor. She's an endocrinologist. And I see what she goes through trying to deliver healthcare and trying to do the right thing by patients. It's not easy. And us patients can be really hard to work with sometimes, but don't give up. Keep working, keep trying to engage with us. And really, I think you as a doctor will obviously get rewarded from doing that, but us patients really need you to just tolerate us, work with us, and keep trying to understand that.
Great. Susan?
I guess, in line with what Mark said, researchers, should also be listening to patients and thinking about patients' needs when they're thinking about what research questions they're going to solve. And it's not going to obviously be relevant in all cases. Sometimes we're looking for a molecular mechanism and patients are not always going to have, the relevant input. But particularly when we're doing research on things that involve patients, I don't think I think that mantra of nothing about us without us is something that we should at least be mindful of at some level. But also, I think I want to talk about, neurotech education, and especially like trying to get more young minds into this field. And a lot of people will think, oh, how can undergrads do anything meaningful in research? These students did amazing things with Mark.
I agree.
And they learned so much along the way. And, they're also very quick learners at that age. And they pivot, they figure things out, they move it forward. And I'm really a proponent of getting more undergraduates involved in the research process, because I think this is a great way to make amazing future doctors, scientists, and industry leaders potentially.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, both of you, for this. This was almost 2 hours. I know you are on a busy schedule together every day, replicating the science. Is that right? So do you still have something planned for today, or is this end of the day?
I think I might have taken my last measurements for today before we started, hopefully. Because having this FNERS kept stuck to my head for 2 hours a day.
So
and my
your dents are out now. Okay, good.
But Andreas, can I just say, I'm so delighted to be chatting to you with this podcast. I've been a big fan of yours for years. But when I saw the lead DBS and the impact you've had on the field, I think it's been phenomenal. So it's really, really special to sit here and chat to you. So thank you very much.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, I'm delighted. I mean, I never was if it wasn't for Mark, I would probably never have ventured into Parkinson's and DBS research. And it's amazing, this partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two of you have created something wonderful, and it was a great privilege to cover that in podcast form. And I think we'll stay in touch for potentially, future collaboration. So thank you also for that opportunity. And thanks again.
We'll see you tomorrow, actually.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll see you tomorrow.
True.
And thank you again for supporting the students with the education and listening to them. And that's quite the experience for them to get a Harvard scientist sort of zoomed in to support them. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.